Hello, my name is David Baker and I'm an interpreter in the English booth at SCEIC, the European Commission's interpretation service. I've been doing this job now for about 10 years and still enjoy doing it, so that's a good sign. And I'm now going to give you a couple of speeches. The first will be on the topic of fox hunting and the controversy surrounding it in England at the moment. Earlier this month, the lower house of the British Parliament, the House of Commons, voted to ban fox hunting. Now, the issue of fox hunting and whether it was a good thing or a bad thing has been a long-running saga of British public life for a number of years now. But the prospect of actually voting to ban it is only relatively recent. In fact, it became a real political prospect when the Labour government took power about 5 years ago now. That was when there was any real chance of this political pressure, this controversy which had been building, actually being turned into legislation. But as I said, that has now come one step closer with the vote in the House of Commons. The vote itself was very clear-cut. 387 MPs were in favour of a ban and 174 were against. So it's clear-cut in the Commons, it would seem, but the issue in the country as a whole is far from being resolved. In fact, it has become a highly divisive issue. I think you could say that a real split has emerged between the anti-hunting and the pro-hunting people in England. The main fault line, as you might expect, is between people who live in the towns and people who live in the countryside. The main supporters of the ban tend to be town dwellers. They see fox hunting, and in particular hunting foxes with packs of dogs, as being inherently cruel and barbaric. According to their description of the events, the fox is chased relentlessly across the countryside by packs of dogs, followed by riders on horseback in their red coats, blowing their horns and trumpets. And once the fox has been finally exhausted by this chase, its fate is often to be torn apart by those baying hounds. A practice then, according to the opponents, that is inherently cruel and barbaric, something that they say doesn't fit comfortably with modern English values, for example the concern about animal welfare. They say that it just isn't worthy of the name of sport and it should therefore be stopped. The pro-hunting lobby, on the other hand, tends on the whole to be made up of people who actually live in the countryside. They resent interference from what they call the townies, the town and city dwellers. They resent the interference by these outsiders into their traditional rural way of life. They say that the opponents don't really have any real idea of what they're talking about. They say that fox hunting is vital to control the number of foxes. Otherwise, foxes would become a pest. They would start to pose a threat, for example, to farm animals. They need to be kept in balance through careful hunting, argue the pro-hunting people. You need to have enough foxes left to eat up harmful vermin, such as rats, mice, and so on, without them getting out of control and posing a threat to domesticated farm animals such as chickens, sheep, whatever. They also argue that hunting plays a vital social and economic function in rural communities. Hunts, for example, bring local people together regularly. They also provide important employment opportunities. Each individual hunting organisation around England employs on average 4 permanent staff. These are the people who are employed to look after the horses and the dogs, for example. In addition, the hunts provide the main business for a whole series of rural industries, for example the saddle making industry, blacksmiths, horse breeders. The pro-hunting lobby claims that the 300 or so individual hunting organisations in England spend more than £14 million a year. They say that this is vital money for sustaining local economies. They say that if a ban were to be imposed, much of this money would just disappear from the local economy, and this would lead to a disastrous fall in employment. And very often, rural areas are areas which suffer from unemployment already. So they say that this would be very serious. They also point to the fact that fox hunting is very deeply rooted in English tradition. I think everybody can instantly conjure up in their mind that image of the hunting scene with the riders in their red jackets and their hats, the horses, the dogs, the horns, etc. They say, the pro-hunting lobby, that a ban would be a distractive act of political correctness. It would destroy a living part of English heritage. So that is the basic situation, grossly simplified, I acknowledge. But it's not, of course, as simple as that. I've described it very much as being a conflict between town and country, but very often the boundaries are more complex and more muddied. For example, in the vote in the House of Commons, basically Labour MPs voted in favour of the ban, Conservative MPs voted against the ban. But there were some Labour MPs, for example, who come from rural areas, and they voted against the ban, and a number of Conservative MPs from urban areas who voted in favour of the ban. So it's not as totally clear-cut and split down party political lines as it might seem. Anyway, as I said, the bill has now passed the first hurdle, in other words, the vote in the House of Commons. The next stage, before it becomes legislation, would be for it to be voted by the House of Lords. Now that will actually be a far more difficult test for this draft legislation, because it's expected that the House of Lords would vote against the legislation. In which case it would go back to the House of Commons and there would be a further discussion, a further debate and a further vote. So it's probable that the ban will not come into force anytime soon, and it's also likely that it will become a key issue during the British general election campaign, which is due to be held this summer. Thank you very much.